friends, it's your teen and tween librarian Rebecca, and we're back for another episode of Bedtime Stories. Last episode we got to see Irene and Curdy both have moments of time to shine in their own ways, but I think the real star of those chapters was Ludi. She disappointed me, I'm not gonna lie. She did not do good in either chapter, and I'm hoping she'll get a bit of a redemption, because even though she's not always great, she's still my favorite. But tonight we are going to see probably the most exciting chapters of this book, is my guess. And we're going to find out what happens, or what is happening, I should say, with the goblins. They have not paused in their plans, and in fact, they are planning to make a move soon. So let's see what happens with the goblins tonight in chapters 26 and 27. Enjoy! Chapter 26, The Goblin Miners. That same night, several of the servants were having a chat together before going to bed. "What can that noise be?" said one of the housemaids, who had been listening for a moment or two. "I've heard it the last 2 nights," said the cook. "If there were any about the place, I should have taken it for rats, but my Tom keeps them far enough." "I've heard, though," said the scullery maid, "that rats move about in great companies sometimes. There may be an army of them invading us. I've heard the noises yesterday and today, too." "It'll be grand fun, then, for my Tom and Mrs. Housekeeper's Bob," said the cook. "They'll be friends for once in their lives, and fight on the same side. I'll engage Tom and Bob together would put to flight any number of rats." "It seems to me," said the nurse, "that the noises are much too loud for that. I've heard them all day, and my princess has asked me several times what they could be. Sometimes they sound like distant thunder, and sometimes like the noises you hear in the mountain from those horrid miners underneath." "I shouldn't wonder," said the cook, "if it was the miners after all. They may have come on some hole in the mountain through which the noises reach to us. They are always boring and blasting and breaking, you know." As he spoke, there came a great rolling rumble beneath them, and the house quivered. They all started up in a fright, and rushing to the hall, found the gentlemen-at-arms in consternation also. They had sent to wake their captain, who said from their description that it must have been an earthquake, an occurrence which, although very rare in that country, had taken place almost within the century, and then went to bed again, strange to say, and fell fast asleep without once thinking of Curdy, or associating the noises they had heard with what he had told them. He had not believed Curdy. If he had, he would at once have thought what he said, and would have taken precautions. As they heard nothing more, they concluded that Sir Walter was right, and that the danger was over for perhaps another 100 years. The fact, as discovered afterwards, was that the goblins had, in working up a second slope facing the stone, arrived at a huge block which lay under the cellars of the house, within the line of the foundations. It was so round that when they succeeded after hard work in dislodging it without blasting, it rolled thundering down the slope with a bounding, jarring roll, which shook the foundations of the house. The goblins were themselves dismayed at the noise, for they knew, by careful spying and measuring, that they must now be very near, if not under, the king's house, and they feared giving an alarm. They, therefore, remained quiet for a while, and when they began to work again, they no doubt thought themselves very fortunate in coming upon a vein of sand which filled a winding fissure in the rock on which the house was built. By scooping this away, they came out in the king's wine cellar. No sooner did they find where they were than they scurried back again like rats into their holes, and running at full speed to the goblin palace, announced their success to the king and queen with shouts of triumph. In a moment, the goblin royal family and the whole goblin people were on their way in hot haste to the king's house, each eager to have a share in the glory of carrying off that same night the Princess Irene. The queen went stumping along in one shoe of stone and one of skin. This could not have been pleasant, and my readers may wonder that, with such skillful workmen about her, she had not yet replaced the shoe carried off by Curdy. As the king, however, had more than one ground of objection to her stone shoes, he no doubt took advantage of the discovery of her toes and threatened to expose her deformity if she had another made. I presume he insisted on her being content with skin shoes and allowed her to wear the remaining granite one on the present occasion only because she was going out to war. They soon arrived in the king's wine cellar, and regardless of its huge vessels, of which they did not know the use, proceeded at once, but as quietly as they could, to force the door that led upwards. That's the end of chapter 26. Chapter 27. The Goblins in the King's House. This is going to be a good one. When Curdie fell asleep, he began at once to dream. He thought he was ascending the mountainside from the mouth of the mine, whistling and singing "Ring, dot, bang," when he came upon a woman and a child who had lost their way. And from that point he went on dreaming everything that had happened to him since he thus met the princess and Ludi, how he had watched the goblins, how he had been taken by them, how he had been rescued by the princess, everything, indeed, until he was wounded, captured, and imprisoned by the men-at-arms. And now he thought he was lying wide awake where they had laid him, when suddenly he heard a great thundering sound. "The cobs are coming," he said. "They didn't believe a word I told them. The cobs will be carrying off the princess from under their stupid noses. But they shan't, that they shan't." He jumped up, as he thought, and began to dress, but to his dismay found that he was still lying in bed. "Now then, I will," he said. "Here goes. I am up now." But yet again he found himself snug in bed. 20 times he tried, and the 20 times he failed, for in fact he was not awake, only dreaming that he was. At length, in an agony of despair, fancying he heard the goblins all over the house, he gave a great cry. Then there came, as he thought, a hand upon the lock of his door. It opened, and looking up, he saw a lady with white hair, carrying a silver box in her hand, enter the room. She came to his bed, he thought, stroked his head and face with cool, soft hands, took the dressing from his leg, rubbed it with something that smelt like roses, and then waved her hands over him 3 times. At the last wave of her hands, everything vanished. He felt himself sinking into the profoundest slumber, and remembered nothing more until he awoke in earnest. The setting moon was throwing a feeble light through the casement, and the house was full of uproar. There was a soft, heavy, multitudinous stamping, a clashing and clanging of weapons, the voices of men and the cries of women mixed with the hideous bellowing which sounded victorious. The cobs were in the house! He sprang from his bed, hurried on some of his clothes, not forgetting his shoes, which were armed with nails. Then spying an old hunting knife or short sword hanging on the wall, he caught it and rushed down the stairs, guided by the sounds of strife, which grew louder and louder. When he reached the ground floor, he found the whole place swarming. All the goblins of the mountain seemed gathered there. He rushed amongst them, shouting, "1, 2, hit and hew, 3, 4, blast and bore." And with every rhyme he came down a great stamp upon a foot, cutting at the same time their faces, executing indeed a sword dance of the wildest description. Away scattered the goblins in every direction, into closets, upstairs, into chimneys, up on rafters, and down to the cellars. Curdie went on stamping and slashing and singing, but saw nothing of the people of the house until he came to the great hall, in which, the moment he entered it, arose a great goblin shout. The last of the men-at-arms, the captain himself, was on the floor, buried beneath a wallowing crowd of goblins. For a while each knight was busy defending himself as well as he could by stabs in the thick bodies of the goblins, for he had soon found their heads all but invulnerable. The queen had attacked his legs and feet with her horrible granite shoe, and he was soon down, but the captain had got his back to the wall and stood out longer. The goblins would have torn them all to pieces, but the king had given orders to carry them away alive, and over each of them, in 12 groups, was standing a knot of goblins, while as many could find room were sitting upon their prostrate bodies. Curdie burst in, dancing and gyrating and stamping and singing like a small incarnate whirlwind. "Where 'tis all a hole, sir, never can be holes. Why should their shoes have soles, sir, when they've got no soles? But she upon her foot, sir, has a granite shoe, the strongest leather boots, sir, 6 would soon be through. The queen gave a howl of rage and dismay, and before she recovered her presence of mind, Curdie, having been with the group nearest him, had 11 of the knights on their legs again. "Stamp on their feet!" he cried as each man rose, and in a few minutes the hall was nearly empty, the goblins running from it as fast as they could, howling and shrieking and limping and cowering every now and then as they ran to cuddle their wounded feet in their hard hands, or to protest them from the frightful stamp of the armed men. And now Curdie approached the group which, in trusting in the queen and her shoe, kept their guard over the prostrate captain. The king sat on the captain's head, but the queen stood in front like an infuriated cat, with her perpendicular eyes gleaming green and her hair standing half up from her horrid head. Her heart was quaking, however, and she kept moving about her skin-shod foot with nervous apprehension. When Curdie was within a few paces, she rushed at him, made one tremendous stamp at his opposing foot, which happily he withdrew in time, and caught him round the waist to dash him on the marble floor. But just as she caught him, he came down with all the weight of his iron-shod shoe upon her skin-shod foot, and with a hideous howl she dropped him, squatted on the floor, and took her foot in both her hands. Meanwhile, the rest rushed on the king and the bodyguard, sent them flying, and lifted the prostrate captain, who was all but pressed to death. It was some moments before he recovered breath and consciousness. "Where's the princess?" cried Curdie again and again. No one knew, and off they all rushed in search of her. Through every room in the house they went, but nowhere was she found. Neither was one of the servants to be seen. But Curdie, who had kept to the lower part of the house, which was now quiet enough, began to hear a confused sound as of a distant hubbub, and set out to find where it came from. The noise grew as his sharp ears guided him to a stair, and so to the wine cellar. It was full of goblins, whom the butler was supplying with wine as fast as he could draw it. While the queen and her party had encountered the men-at-arms, Harelip, with another company, had gone off to search the house. They captured every one they met, and when they could find no more, they hurried away to carry them safe to the caverns below. But when the butler, who was amongst them, found that their path lay through the wine cellar, he bethought himself of persuading them to taste the wine. And as he hoped, they no sooner tasted than they wanted more. The routed goblins, on their way below, joined them, and when Curdie entered, they were all with outstretched hands, in which were vessels of every description, from saucepan to silver cup, pressing around the butler, who sat at the tap of a huge cask, filling and filling. Curdie cast one glance around the place before commencing his attack, and saw in the farthest corner a terrified group of the domestics, unwatched, but cowering without courage to attempt their escape. Amongst them was the terror-stricken face of Ludi. Oh no, Ludi! But nowhere could he see the princess. Seized with the horrible conviction that Harelip had already carried her off, he rushed amongst them, unable for wrath to sing any more, but stamping and cutting with greater fury than ever. "Stamp on their feet! Stamp on their feet!" he shouted, and in a moment the goblins were disappearing through the hole in the floor like rats and mice. They could not have vanished so fast, however, but that many more goblin feet had to go limping back over the underground ways of the mountain that morning. Presently, however, they were reinforced from above by the king and his party, with the redoubtable queen in their head. Finding Curdie again busy amongst her unfortunate subjects, she rushed at him once more with the rage of despair, and this time gave him a bad bruise on the foot. Then a regular stamping fight got up between them, Curdie, with the point of his hunting knife, keeping her from clasping her mighty arms around him, as he watched his opportunity of getting once more a good stamp at her skin-shod foot. But the queen was more wary as well as more agile than hitherto. The rest, meantime, finding their adversary thus matched for the moment, paused in their headlong hurry, and turned to the shivering group of women in the corner. As if determined to emulate his father and have a son-woman of some sort to share his future throne, Hairlip rushed at them, caught up Ludi, oh, poor Ludi, and sped with her to the hole. She gave a great shriek, and Curdie heard her, and saw the plight she was in. Gathering all his strength, he gave the queen a sudden cut across the face with his weapon, came down as she started back, with all his weight on the proper foot, and sprang to Ludi's rescue. The prince had 2 defenseless feet, and on both of them, Curdie stamped just as he reached the hole. He dropped his burden and rolled shrieking into the earth. Curdie made one stab at him as he disappeared, caught hold of the senseless Ludi, and having dragged her back to the comber, there mounted guard over her, preparing once more to encounter the queen. Her face streaming with blood, and her eyes flashing green lightning through it, she came on with her mouth open and her teeth grinning like a tiger's, followed by the king and her bodyguard of the thickest goblins. But the same moment, in rushed the captain and his men, and ran at them, stamping furiously. They dared not encounter such an onset. Away they scurried, the queen foremost. Of course, the right thing would have been to take the king and queen prisoners, and hold them hostages for the princess, but they were so anxious to find her that no one thought of detaining them until it was too late. Having thus rescued the servants, they set about searching the house once more. None of them could give the least information concerning the princess. Ludi was almost silly with terror, and although scarcely able to walk, would not leave Curdie's side for a single moment. Again, he allowed the others to search the rest of the house, where, except a dismayed goblin lurking here and there, they found no one. While he requested Ludi take him to the princess's room. She was as submissive and obedient as if he had been the king. He found the bedclothes tossed about, and most of them on the floor, while the princess's garments were scattered all over the room, which was in the greatest confusion. It was only too evident that the goblins had been there, and Curdie had no longer any doubt that she had been carried off at the very first of the inroad. With a pang of despair, he saw how wrong they had been in not securing the king and the queen and prince, but he determined to find and rescue the princess, as she had found and rescued him, or meet the worst fate to which the goblins could doom him. That's the end of chapter 27. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Bedtime Stories. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the library's YouTube channel. You can also find out what's happening at the library by visiting us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Or you can always just go to the library's website. I hope to see you again for the next episode of Bedtime Stories, but until then, be well and sleep well.